All right, everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Mubarak on the Taknashini of our beloved Maulana Shah Rahim Al Husseini Hazarima. The past few weeks have been an intense experience of sadness and joy for all of us. While each one of us is experiencing and internalizing these events, there are lots of questions that we have. Hence, with the view to provide a comfortable transition with appropriate knowledge and understanding and significance of these past events, National ITREB has organized special sessions to be conducted by experienced faculty members, touching on various aspects of Imamat, Taknashini, Nas, Noor, etc. The format will be a 40-minute of presentation with multiple spaces for reflections. We will wrap up with 15 minutes for evaluations and Q&A towards the end. Please post your questions related to this topic in the chat box, and we will try to respond to as many questions as we can. It is an honor for me to introduce Dr. Hussein Rashid as our esteemed faculty for today's session. Dr. Hussein Rashid is the founder of Islamicate, L3C, a consultancy focusing on religious literacy and cultural competency. He works with a varied variety of NGOs, foundations, nonprofits, and governmental agencies for content expertise on religion broadly, with a specialization on Islam. He has taught at several universities and published academic works on religion and Islam. He currently serves as the Assistant Dean of Religion and Public Life at Harvard Divinity School. Over to you, Dr. Rashid.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Rana, for that lovely introduction. Assalamu alaikum and yali madu to everyone who's joining us. Really appreciate the time and effort to be with you today and offer a chance to reflect on today the murid-murshid relationship. One of the things that when I was asked to do this that was very difficult for me is that this relationship is highly personal. It is one that is cultivated and developed over time between the individual murid and the murshid. And so it felt very difficult for me to be able to say conclusively or definitively or to say, hey, this is what this means, this is what you're looking forward to, at really such a transitional and pivotal time for us as murids of a Hazar Imam. And so, what I've opted to do, and what I hope you'll join me with today, is exploring different ways that the Murid Murshid relationship has manifests in Muslim traditions throughout history, and looking at individual acts of devotion and how those help bind us in community. So, that's hopefully what we'll be able to get through today. I'm going to start sharing my screen. And one of the things that I really want us to start thinking about is as we approach this relationship, is I'd really like to hear from you now. So if you would please put it in the chat box, is that right, Rahana? Or the Q&A box?
Please use the chat box.
Please use the chat box. So just let's just take a minute and write down what emerges from you when you hear Murid Murshid.
Akram, sir, can we see if the chat box is enabled for participants?
Yeah, it looks like the chat is disabled. And so if the chat is disabled, just for this first one, maybe we could use the Q&A box while we get the chat re-enabled. So if you could please just take a minute, what emerges for you when you hear Murid Murshid? And it doesn't have to be in the form of a question, please, what emerges for you?
Okay, the chat should be enabled.
Thank you so much. Dr. Rashid, we already have someone post unconditional love.
I'm seeing some lovely answers, the bayah, the mutual relationship of love, deeply personal relationship, a personal parent-child bond, bayat and absolute devotion connection to the imam. These are wonderful for me to help me understand where you all are at now. Again, I don't know what will be useful to you, so I'm hoping As we go through today, we'll be able to engage much more in conversation, and I'll be able to hear from you um, as we develop this this session together. But devotion, love, faith keep coming up. And so I think this is a good way for me to transition into us thinking about just some definitional terms. What do these terms mean? So let me start with the term murid. Murid is related to is related to this idea of irada, somebody who desires or wishes something. So murid is somebody who desires something. And so in this context, we have to ask, what is it that the murid is desiring? What do they want? What are they aiming towards? And so therefore we think of a murid as an aspirant, somebody who aspires to something. So it's not only somebody who desires something, but somebody who wishes to elevate themselves. That it's not just a let me take, let me receive, let me grow myself, but let me elevate myself, let me become better than I am now. And I think that's a really important part of this is that the murid is looking for betterment, not just wealth or not just the benefit that they can accrue as an individual. And so we understand then the murid become as a devotee, somebody who's devoted to somebody else. And in this instance, in our context, we are talking about the murshid. And the murshid is a person or an individual who guides, who is an instructor, and who is an advisor. So we understand the murshid has a variety of different roles. We can understand the murshid in a variety of different ways through that guiding, through that leadership, as somebody who instructs us, tells us what to do, as an advisor, as a companion. But ultimately, we give our devotion to the murshid. So this is a really important way for us to understand how the murshid functions. But of course, these terms are not just limited to an Ismaili context. They have a larger, broader history in Muslim communities. And one of the places I'd like to begin is with this lovely poem called The Conference of the Birds. The Conference of the Birds is a Sufi poem. That is, it comes out of a different type of Muslim mystical tradition, but where the murid, the murshid relationship is incredibly important. And so, what I wanted to do is just give a brief background on the Conference of the Birds and why I think it's important for us. The Conference of the Birds was written by a very famous author by the name of Fariduddin Attar, who lived in approximately 1145 to 1221 of the Christian era. He also wrote a very important history of Sufi figures, which I won't get into, but just for those of you who are curious, he's a scholar of Sufism. The text itself is written around 1177 of the Christian era, and it's a box story. And by a box story, it means that there's a larger story that connects everything, which is really what we're going to spend time on. But then there's smaller illustrative stories that come in through the major story that explain these different elements of what the teaching of the particular story or the particular poem is of the poem is at that moment. So the outline is that there's a conference of the birds, hence the title. In Persian/Arabic, it's Mantaqa Ter, which literally means a parliament or a conference, a place where people come to talk of the birds. And the birds have come together to choose a leader. And they are met by the hoopoe. This is the image you see. The hoopoe is a bird that exists throughout much of the world, unfortunately not in North America, but is a very famous bird and used as a wise bird. It's used as a symbol of wisdom. And the hoopoe comes and says he will guide them to their new leader. And so he guides them through seven valleys. And I'm not going to get into the valleys, but these are for Athar's Sufi path, the valleys of how you develop your soul, right? So how the murid develops their souls. So in this story, we understand the hoopoe as the murshid and the birds as the murids who follow him through these seven valleys. Not every bird makes it through the valleys. This is really important to understand that in this language of Sufism, of the murid-murshid relationship, that the murshid can only guide the murid so far. At certain points, murids will make decisions, or murids are um, limited by their own capacities at the moment. These capacities are not eternal, but they're the capacities of the moment. And inshallah, we go beyond those capacities and we can be guided in new ways and in new directions. But in this, we understand that not every murid makes it through every level, through each of the valleys. The materiality, their conditions, their egos, their personalities keep them from moving forward. And ultimately, they meet the Simurg. The Simurg then becomes their leader. Now, for those of you who haven't read the story, there's a lovely twist to this I don't want to give away. For those of you who have, hopefully you understand what I'm doing here and why I'm stopping at this point. But they meet the Simurg, and it's a way of understanding that the Murshid, the Hupo, has guided them to an elevation of self where they can understand the true reality, right? That they can understand the haq, the true reality of the world in which we live. And so this is really what the Murshid does, is the elevation of self to allow us access to a higher level of understanding, a higher sense of reality, and to understand who the true guide is. So this is one approach to understanding the Murid Murshid guide. And this comes from a different tradition than the Shi'i tradition. This comes from a Sufi tradition, which is obviously very heavily inflected by Shi'ism. Shi'ism and Sufism share very many connection points. But this instance is really just a chance for us to explore how a Murid Murshid relationship shows up outside an explicitly Shi'i space. And what I want to do is just share a short 2-minute video how this conference, how the Conference of the Bird continues to be developed and evoked in very different contexts. So here is a modern dance company called Anakaya. This is a promo for their rendition of Conference of the Birds, which is read not so much as an allegory of Sufism, but of contemporary questions around immigration and refugees, so that we understand that the spiritual and the worldly are not separate. That is, din and dunya are in fact deeply intertwined with one another, and they can often be used as allegories to continue to um, enlighten ourselves. And Rihanna, can you confirm if you can hear the audio? Just a thumbs up. So I really, really like to use this to talk about Conference of the Birds and about relationships because I think sometimes we engage with teachings, guidance, as coming in as written text, something we read, or as something we hear. And really, we have to understand, I think, that to be a murid is to be fully embodied, that this is something that engages all of our senses when it comes to guidance. And also, we embody in the world, we carry with us in the way we dress, the way we treat other people, that this is also an expression of what it means to be a murid attempting to fulfill the guidance of the murshid. And so for me, this video is just a lovely way to reflect on that, and also to realize that the din and dunya are not neatly separable in Muslim thought. What I want to do is just offer a minute now to ask the same question I asked before, but now that we've taken a step, hopefully in this direction, to ask you again in 1 minute, what is emerging for you from this introduction to the murid-murshid relationship?
Dr. Rashid, some of the responses we're seeing is one for all for one, journey, guide, dependence, reflection of oneself, guiding in the spiritual world and in the physical world, single soul, complete faith, fertile soil, loyalty to the guide, devotion to the guide, commitment to a relationship, ultimately salvation, and a spiritual guide dropped to the ocean, truth seeking for light.
Thank you so much, Rohana. And I think the two-way relationship is something that we really have to keep in mind, is that the murshid responds to how we respond, how we as murids respond to the murshid. And that this is a bi-directional relationship, that the more the murshid seeks to elevate us, and the more we respond with that elevation, then the more that the murshid can guide us even further, right? And the more we're willing to say, we will meet you where you want us to be, knowing that we will not always be there, but that we are attempting to push ourselves and get out of our comfort zones, gives the murshid then the ability then for us to, as murids, to continue to strive. And I think this is incredibly important, that we can't just say, oh, the murshid will always guide us and we will be fine. No, we have agency, we have action here. And so from that, I want to turn to a particularly Shi'i perspective. And this is from the Ismaili dua, as many of you know. It is a verse from the Quran. O Prophet, excuse me, O Prophet, those who give you their allegiance, they give to God. God's hand is upon their hands. And he who breaks his oath breaks it against himself. And he who fulfills his promise to God, he shall be rewarded many times over. So this is the idea of bayah, where those who give their allegiance to the Prophet are giving their allegiance to God. So that by giving their bayah to the Prophet, by giving their allegiance to the Prophet, they are in fact giving it to God. And when the Prophet puts his hand, when the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family puts his hand upon a murid's hand, then it is akin to God putting their hand upon it. In other words, God is a partner in this bayah. Um, and when a person breaks their oath against the Prophet, against the murshid, then the person who gets hurt is the person who breaks the oath, that is the murid. Because the murshid does not need the murid needs the murshid. So even in this bi-directional relationship we've been talking about, we have to understand that there are responsibilities and there is a power dynamic. There is a sense of loyalty and devotion that we've talked about. Um, and that when the murid fulfills their promise, God will meet them and fulfill their promise. A very famous story is told of Nasr Khosrow, the famous Ismaili Dai, poet, philosopher, Hujjat Nasr Khosrow. Um, he wasn't born Ismaili, he became Ismaili. And part of his life story, part of his autobiography, is that he reads this verse in the Quran and he says, okay, well, now the Prophet is not here. To whom can I give my hand? Because God would not write something in the Quran that could no longer be true. In other words, that was so dependent on time that we could not be good Muslims, right? That there might be a description of a historical event that's bound in time. But what we need to do to be good Muslims could not be bound in time. So that to give the allegiance to the Prophet meant that we still had to give somebody, we had to be able to give our hand to somebody now. And it's through this that Dai Nasr Khusro then turns to, at the time, the Fatimid Imam, Imam Muslim Sabbalah, to say, I will go give my hand there in allegiance. And it's through this that he becomes Ismaili, that the Imams are now the receptacles, the receivers uh, of this bayat now that we give. And so there that he goes and gives his bayat and becomes then a major da'i within the tradition. And within broader Muslim traditions, there's also this idea of the one to whom you give your bayat to is also an intercessory figure. That is, somebody who can plead for you on the day of judgment. And so this is turning to the Quran, chapter 4, verse 64. And if, when they had wronged themselves, that is, people who had betrayed the Prophet, if when they had wronged themselves, they had but come to you and asked forgiveness of God, and the messenger had asked forgiveness for them, then they would have found God forgiving and merciful. In other words, that when you go and seek forgiveness of God, you can also go to the one to whom you give bayat, and that person will ask for forgiveness for you, and you will find then God forgiving and merciful. Because this is an important part of this murid-murshid relationship from a Shi'i perspective, which is this idea of intercession of the guide, right? That by virtue of their elevated status, that they serve as this point of barakah, of blessing, where they receive special favors that are then transmitted to murids. And this comes back to another one of our very famous intellectual figures in the Ismaili tradition, who is Nasiruddin Tusi, who's writing in the Alamut period. Again, not born Ismaili, becomes Ismaili. And part of his rationale is that God is perfect. God exists in a level of perfection. Human beings, in their natural state, in their default state, are imperfect, are inherently and definitionally imperfect. God would not leave a gap between a being, between the divine perfection and the imperfection of creation without leaving some sort of bridge or guide. And he determines that that guide, he uses the language of um, peer as opposed to murshid, but peer, which is a similar term of a leader or advisor, instructor, would be the Imam Zaman, the Imam of the time, who at this point were the Alamut, the Imams of Alamut, to where he goes and gives his bayat and becomes an incredible intellectual in the sphere of Alamut. But he sees the Imams then serving as this bridge between our imperfection and the perfection, because the Imams have been given this particular relationship with the divine. And so it's this bridge that he's playing with and engaging. So the Imams are these intercessory figures, they're these bridge figures for us. Um, and again, this is not the totality of how we understand and describe the Imams. That would be a whole day, that would be a whole lifetime of trying to understand. I'm simply, as I said earlier, trying to explore different manifestations of how the murid-murshid relationship expresses itself. We may understand individually very differently, again, because these relationships are highly personal. I'm simply pointing at historical moments. What I want to do now is turn to some devotional aspects, and I'm turning to two Black Sunni creatives, Kenan, who's Canadian Somali, and the other is Mostaf Yassin Bey. He goes by both names, based in Brooklyn, New York. They're both musicians. This is a song that they did together. As I said, they're both Sunni Muslims. This is a song they did together called Prayer Song. And I'll play it and then I'll talk a little bit about what's in the lyrics.
This morning when I woke up, I walked into a nightmare and found myself arrested. Before I had my breakfast, I saw they murdered justice and told me to accept it. Went out to see my neighbors, but saw some demonstrators and violent liberators. The fire had the raging when you and I were waiting, entirely forsaken. Ahmad Nabi Muhammad, Ya Shafi'ul Qiyamah, alayhi salam alayka. Ahmad Nabi Muhammad, Ya Shafi'ul Qiyamah, alayhi salam alayka.
So here I just want to pick up a phrase in the chorus, which is Shafi al-Qiyamah. That is, the intercessor for the day of judgment, the intercessor for the Qiyamah. And this to me is really important because we understand this. I just walked us through a particularly Shi'i understanding of the imams as being intercessors. But obviously, within Sunni Islam, this idea of the line of imams, of imamat, is not present. But the Prophet continues to play this really important role. So the Prophet then continues to be that intercessory figure. This, of course, comes out of the notion where the Quran tells Muslims to praise the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family, to continuously recite the salawat whenever the Prophet is mentioned. And so here we see a particular manifestation of that. I want to turn to South Asia, to a particular qawwali performed by the Sabri brothers. This is a particular form of devotion that comes out of the Chishti Sufi order. So again, Sufi, so intersections with Shiism. But this particular call is called Dai Halima, meaning Auntie Halima. She was the wet nurse of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family. Um, and I've added the translation here on the screen. I'll try to follow along with the pointer. I'm not sure if the pointer is clear, but I'll try to follow along with the pointer as the lyrics come through, and then I'll talk a little bit about it. And so, here's this moment where it's not just the Prophet and the Prophet's family, but it is his wet nurse, right? Light will spread from the home of Abdullah, yani the father of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family. Um, Halima, the moon is about to descend in your lap, right? So even by virtue of this proximity to the Prophet, Halima is considered a blessed being, and then she becomes the focus of these prophetic blessings. Now, of course, we're not literally praising Halima in this. She doesn't have the same status in any tradition of the Ahlul Bayt, for example. But really, this is a way for us to understand the importance of praising these important religious figures. Cuts across Sunni, Shi'i, Sufi. It's an integral part of Muslim history. And Shi'i manifestations of this are particularly devoted to the Ahlul Bayt, but are very much in line with other types of devotionals that we hear across Muslim traditions. I just want to address one question that I see in the Q&A. What is the difference between Pir and Murshid in the Ismaili context? This is something that we'll address in one of the other Aspire sessions. So I'm not going to get into the details now because I don't want to steal somebody else's thunder. In this session, we'll be using the terms interchangeably because that's often how they show up in the historical record. But please continue to listen to the Aspire sessions in order to engage with some of these terms mean in the technical natures in the Ismaili context. Also, in terms of volume, the recordings are uneven in their volume. For example, this recording is from the 1970s. So please, if you can, when it's low, raise the volume on your end as much as you can. We are maxed out on our end. And if it's too high on your end, please turn it down on your end. It's just, unfortunately, the nature of the recordings. That feels like an awfully technical way to turn back into a reflection point, but let's turn to a reflection point. We just were introduced to some conceptions of the murshid from a Shi'i perspective. So let's take a minute as we want to do. Please use the chat function. What is emerging for you from this introduction to the murid-murshid relationship?
Dr. Rashid, we're receiving several responses. Personal relationships, universal, spiritual father, murshid, shanakat, in all faiths, similar bond, elimination for difficulties, permanency, love and devotion, doctrine, logic to hakikat, historical examples, canopy, intercessor, and a contract for spiritual elevation. These are a few that we've seen.
Thank you so much. I really sorry I went ahead of one slide, so you know what's coming next. But I'm glad you're not thinking about questions of intersection, as well as intersection, because I see in the Q&A somebody's writing about Conference of the Birds still. So thank you for that, because that is intersectional. But we're talking about intercession right now, and thinking about that question of intercession and the role of the murshid as intercessor. I'm grateful to whoever said shanach. This is a Persian word that means knowledge or knowing, but it is not the way we think about, okay, I know 2 + 2 = 4, but it's a deeper knowledge. It's not quite marifa in Arabic, which is this gnosis, but it is a deeper sense of knowing. And so there is always this invitation that the murshid, because we are, as murids, being an aspirant, we are a devotee to the murshid, that we are aspiring to an elevation, to a deeper knowledge, in other words, to see that haqq, to see that deeper truth that undergirds our realities. I think this is incredibly important, so I'm grateful for whoever mentioned Shanakh in the chat, and really thinking about our relationship to perfection and imperfection, and how we can always attempt to elevate our knowledge, but we'll always need that bridge builder of the murshid to bring us across. So really grateful for some of those comments. Where I want to end with having us think about is moving from the individual. Where the murid is an individual, and where I tried to get us to think about is that this is not about individual success, but it's about how we are tied together into a community of believers around the murshid. And here, I really want to spend some time thinking about what has been part of our longer history. What is the day of the first bayah? And everybody gets very confused by this question. But the first bayah is actually in pre-creation, when God gathers all the souls in pre-creation and says, "Am I not your Lord? Alasta bi rabbikum, am I not your Lord?" And all these souls, these unembodied souls, cry out, "Bala shahidna, indeed, yes, we bear witness. You are our Lord." This is the first bayah that we make before we're even embodied. And then our entire struggle is an attempt, then once we are embodied, is an attempt to always remember that we've made this first bayah, and that God has given us these guides, these murshids, to continue to guide us in our embodied form, to recommit to that first bayah by re-engaging with the bayah on a regular basis. And there's a beautiful poem, very famous poet by the name of Jalaluddin Rumi. Some of you may have heard of him. And he writes this poem called the Masnavi, which means couplets, rhymed couplets. Masnavi and Manavi, the rhymed couplets of meaning. And he begins, and I love this. He begins the Masnavi with Vishnu as nay. Listen to the nay. The ney, which is a reed flute. It's like some of you may be familiar with the bansuri. It's in the same family. It's this makes this very melancholic, longing notes. And the first word he says is Beshno, listen. And what's the first revelation? Ikra, recite. So remember, Rumi is a Quran scholar. So the Masnavi is a commentary on the Quran, and he's working at multiple levels. He's playing with the word. He's saying, Vishnu, listen, because the Quran says somebody's reciting. So listen, what is the Quran trying to teach you? But then listen to the reed. And what's a reed? How does a reed make its sound? It's cut from the reed bed, right? You have to cut it off from the reed bed so air can go through it, right? And this is what he's referencing. He's referencing the day of Allah's, the day of our first bayat, where we were part of this reed bed of souls, unembodied souls, in front of the divine, and we're cut from that divine presence. And now our prayers are the sound of the reed. Our prayers are our call to go back to the divine. Our prayers are the sounds we make when we wish to hear the beloved that is God responding back to us. And so this, every moment, every murid in their embodied nature should be then reflecting and responding and enacting this idea of the first and ongoing bayat that we continue to give to the murshid that we've been blessed with. So this is our first bayah. Um, and then we think about this verse that comes out of the Golden Jubilee, or that is highlighted during the Golden Jubilee. Oh, humanity, be wary of your Lord who created you from a single soul, reminding us that we have a universal commitment. And think about Imam Ali's letter to Malik al-Ashtar. Imam Ali alayhi salam writes to the man he's appointed to the governor of Egypt, Malik al-Ashtar, and says, the people who you're going to are of two kinds. Either your siblings, your sibling in religion, or your like in creation. In other words, we may have proximity to people who share a religion with us, but we still have bounds to everybody else because we are all created beings. Um, and so we have to remember that when we hear this, that this is both Quranic and is part of an ongoing guidance from the Imams, that we are created from a single soul, a single well of being, that we are bound together as siblings. And this is something that comes up often in Shi'i texts. And so, what does this mean for us as a community? That because of the presence of a murshid, the imam, that we are always working, even in the absence of the physical absence of the imam, from our day-to-day lives, right? I mean, obviously we have a hazir imam, but the imam is not present with us as we walk through the days, as we're Jamaat Khanas, that even in the absence of that imam in our day-to-day lives, the physical presence, we have a sense of community. And here I really want to draw on Shanila Koja Mulji's recent book on rebuilding community, uh, and thinking about how she's really looking at women. And I think it's wonderful that she's doing this because growing up in a pioneer family in the United States, it was always the women who did so much of the hard work of keeping the community together while men were often with institution building. And not that one is better than the other, but this is the type of labor that goes unremarked. So she writes in one section, the act of seva, the act of service, is simultaneously social and spiritual. Through these acts, women like Sharbano have contributed to fostering Ismaili spaces of worship and deepen bonds of congregational life over decades. That to do seva, to do service, is spiritual and social. It's how we keep the community together, both by our spiritual cultivation and through the physical making of community. That it is a both and. Coming back to what we looked at when I mentioned conferences of verse, this we have to understand how deen and dunya are intertwined, and that they're not separate, and therefore they must be balanced. Fariel Roshri reminisces that when she arrived in the United States in the mid-1960s on an African scholarship program for American universities, there were less than 10 Ismaili students in the country. These early migrants and refugees had no formal places of worship and gathered at each other's homes to pray and eat together. At these gatherings, Ismailis not only prayed together but also found respite away from the everyday anxieties of economic precarity, uncertain futures, and racism. So in this service, in this seva, and coming together as a community, We create spaces that are utopian for us, that are places of healing for us, that give us relief from the struggles and the difficulties of the world. But again, just like the murid can not only be for themselves, otherwise they're not truly a murid, they're a taker. This elevation has to be for the benefit of other people. So that when we create this utopia for 45 minutes, for an hour, for 2 hours, how do we take that and seek to create that utopia in the world outside of the worship spaces? How do we recognize that this is not a boundary where we have this ideal environment for a short period of time and then we go back to a place where we say there can be no utopia, rather than saying, no, I've experienced something profound. How do I manifest that into the world in a way that is for the upliftment of all people? This is the last quote from the book. In chapter 3, we met Khurshid Bimani, who similarly insisted that the Imam gives seva, and so she receives that opportunity as a blessing, barakah. These sentiments posit the Imam as an active spiritual force in the world, who facilitates his followers' religious life by giving them opportunities to practice Islamic virtues of generosity, kindness, patience, and goodwill, amongst others. In other words, being a murid and that elevation of the self is a chance to then practice this adab, this way of being in the world that is filled with generosity and kindness and patience and goodwill and other ethics. How do you carry that through? And then by giving us that opportunity, the Imam continues to be an active spiritual force for us. And so we understand then the murid-murshid relationship is highly personal, but is not and is private, but that doesn't mean that it is not for the benefit of other people. That it can't be just for us privately, but that we're bound together as a community at different levels. And so, how are we working by virtue of our commitment to the murshid to then carry this out into the world? I want to end with one video. I think some of you may know this. It is called One Jamaat. And I'll let it play for itself. It does cut across a variety of different languages, but the lyrics are all the same. So if you understand any of the languages, that's basically what they're saying in all the languages. So it's English, French, Hindustani, Tajik, so on. So please listen and enjoy.
We live in diversity, plurality, पर एक है हम सारे. We live in different cities and countries, पर एक है हम सारे. अलग है ज़बानें, अलग है लिबास, पर एक है जज़्बा. हम एक है, हम साथ साथ. We are together, one Jamaat. हम एक है, हम साथ साथ. We are together, one Jamaat. Assalamu alaikum, ya Ali Madad. Kaif haluka, mamnoon shukran rahmat. अलग है जुबाने, अलग है लिबास, पर एक है जज्बा. Whenever I look into your eyes, whenever I feel the warmth of your smiles, I remember that in this sky we are many rays from the same light. Kale hum giri azari, चले आसमां की सारी. बादल से बरसे बारिश नूरानी, बड़ी खुशियाँ और एकता हमारी.
man das padas atreso man baon shaman وقتی سحرم برم نوری شفاق با چشم دل نوری شفاق اشکا با گونه ها روان سوزه یکی بسینه ها یاد یکی بر لبان Nous chantons, nous dansons, nous brillons comme les étoiles dans le ciel. Nous chantons, nous dansons, nous brillons, nous lumière. Rangilu marudu thai gayo re. Rangilu marudu thai gayo re. Ek tani tum par jumi rayo re. Rangilu marudu thai पहरवेश अलग पर सावलो जिगरा हम एक है हम साथ साथ we are together in जमात हम एक है हम साथ साथ we are together in जमात हम एक है हम साथ साथ
And so for our last time, please, what is emerging from you as we come to an end on our relationship uh, uh, from this introduction to murid murshid relationships? Let's just give 30 seconds for this one. You can continue writing, but
Hussein, sir, we're seeing pluralism, devotion, and
yeah.
humble, unity and peace, one Jamaat, one soul, relationship based on love and devotion, beyond being private and personal, Imam
I
of the
think,
community.
yeah, thank you, Rahana. I think that beyond being private and personal is right, that we can't get into these binaries of this and that. It's for me or it's not for me. But it can be both for me and also beyond me. And I think that's really important in this, is that the Murid Murshid relationship is not a greedy relationship. It can't be that way. It has to be a generous one. Um, and that the Jamaat is unified through the Imam, and we are in service to community. We are going to end, I think we are going to move to the formal Q&A period. So for this, I think we're asking participants to use the formal Q&A box rather than the chat box. And we also have a QR code here for you to do an evaluation. So as you're thinking through what it is you might want to ask or what you might want to engage in conversation in, please also take a moment to scan this QR code. And I think we're going to put a link as well in the chat box for you to do an evaluation of the session. There are a couple of things that came up in the Q&A that I just wanted to address. There was a question for other notions of intercession in the Quran. And I gave one example about forgiveness. It's the most clear and direct as it relates to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family. But there are others throughout the Quran that talk about intercession, God-giving intercession, that this is the divine right for God to be able to do this, and how it functions in community. So there's a fair amount for those of you who are thinking about intercession of the Quran. There's a fair amount of references within the Quran on that. I think one of the other questions is, um, you know, what should my relationship with the murshid look like? Like when we do tasbihs, it's Ya Ali, Ya Hazir Imam. So where does Imam Ali fit into this? Where does Allah fit into this? And I'm really grateful for that question because I think it comes back to something we started with, is that the murid-murshid relationship is highly personal and highly variable. There are times where I feel like Ya Hazir Imam is the right way. This is me personally. Other times I feel like sitting with Imam Ali and Imam Ali's teachings, alayhi salam. And sometimes I feel like I need to empty myself out to Allah directly. Some people feel like, no, I have a murshid, this is where I need to go, and I'll do that. And mashallah, do what is right for you. This relationship is something that you cultivate. I'm not here to tell you what's right or wrong. I'm here to express to you the diversity of ways we can cultivate and engage that relationship and recognize that is for the elevation of ourselves as individuals, which then lends to the betterment of community.
I see a question. If you would want to address it, is the imam an intercession or an intermediary? I think just clarification on what that means. They understand it's a personal search for each murid, but what is the ITREB guidance for educating the Jamaat in that way?
Historically, the Imams have expressed themselves as intercessors. We have understood them historically as intercessors. We go through the Imams as intercessors, as a focus of barakah, as a focus of elevation, as Nasruddin Tusi says, this bridge between our imperfection and the divine perfection.
I want to thank on behalf of the audience, the participants. Thank you, Dr. Rashid, on such a wonderful session and our gratitude for your insightful perspectives on the Murid and Murshid relationship and the deep knowledge and engaging delivery that you have made this session truly enriching for all of us. If you have not had a chance to, please do complete the evaluation link. I also briefly just wanted to share my screen, if possible, to share with you the next weeks. I know that there were some requests for the upcoming sessions. We don't have the list of all the upcoming sessions, but I do have available for you the exciting session that we will be anticipating next week. So I would like to share that next Sunday, on March 16th, we will be having a session with Dr. Nargis Virani on the concepts of Valaya and Balaya in the Quran and the Muslim devotional literatures, how expressions of love, devotion, supplications, and prayers directed towards the Prophet Imam Ali and all the Shi'i Imams. Dr. Nargis Virani has a small request for all of us, and she's inviting all of us who have registered to share one instance, motive, symbol, metaphor related to this topic from our own devotional traditions or cultural references that has inspired us or has given us words to express our sentiments. You can include references from any devotional piece, including contemporary songs, geets that Ismaili artists have been creating to air on Ismaili TV. You can explain your choices and how you are inspired by it or how it has enabled us to sustain our faith and understanding of our faith, our relationship with the Imam of the time for over 1400 years. A separate email will be sent out to you tomorrow to submit your responses by March 13th. Thank you, everyone in attendance. Once again, we really appreciate your time and participation in these sessions. Thank you so much.